Welcome to Future Squared, the podcast all about corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-empowerment. Future Squared brings you a double dose of innovation inspiration every week to help you and your company stay relevant in an era of rapid change and 10x your results in both your professional and personal life. Each week, I'll bring you corporate innovators, entrepreneurs, authors, keynote speakers, and thought leaders such as Steve Blank, David Allen, Brad Feld, Tim Harford, Karen Dillon, Jenny Blake, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, Pascal Finette, Ryan Blair, and Ash Moria, to name just a few. While every Friday, I'll bring you Fast Fix Friday, some quick, digestible insights to help you end your week on a high as you head off for the weekend. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation hub school and consultancy based in Melbourne, Australia and Singapore that works with companies to help them adopt the mindset, methods and tools to navigate change and survive and thrive in an era of rapid disruption. If your organization needs help coming up with ideas, testing and turning ideas into reality, incubating teams, driving cultural change, or connecting and partnering with startups, then visit www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. Welcome back to Future Squared. This installment of the podcast is a little bit different. I had two big name guests lined up this week, but both had to reschedule their interviews to a later date. So I was left scrambling with only 4 days to go until our normal go live every Sunday. I left an update on my LinkedIn seeking anybody doing cool things in the corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, or personal development space, and woke up to find close to 50 nominations waiting for me. After much deliberation, I decided to interview someone doing awesome things in the space of venture investing, diversity, impact, inclusion, and female-led businesses. Drew Koven is the managing director of LDR Ventures. He's successfully incubated, operated, turned around, advised, and invested in fashion and consumer lifestyle brands worldwide for over 20 years. His investments include the likes of Thrive Market, Pledgling, and Australian fashion startup Fame and Partners. He's widely regarded as a pioneering force in eCommerce, Mcommerce, Omnichannel Retail, and a thought leader for innovative technologies which support fashion and retail. He's recognized as a top 25 retailer by Apparel magazine, top 3 mobile marketer by Mobile Marketer magazine, Boston Business Hall of Fame inductee, Virgin Atlantic Entrepreneur of the Year, 40 Under 40 recipient, YEO charter member, and 2 chapter president and advisory board member at Apparel magazine. Given the tight timelines, I had little time to prepare for Drew, but got to know him well very quickly. It was a fun episode to record, so here we go. From Los Angeles, California, I bring you Drew Koven. Welcome to Future Squared, Drew.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. And where in the States are you joining us from? I know from what I gathered on your LinkedIn, you grew up in New York and now you live in LA. Is that right? Or is that just assumption?
You're absolutely right. I went from Brooklyn, New York to Bel Air, Los Angeles, California.
Awesome. And what prompted the flight west?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. My wife had always had an inkling. She was in the entertainment business in music. And one day we were on a trip out here to California and we were jogging and we had a flight to catch back to the East Coast. And we looked at one another and said, maybe we should just stay here.
Yeah.
So she was the motivation. And then ultimately I got recruited by Guess Jeans to come run e-commerce and omnichannel retail and innovation for the global company. And they brought me out here.
Awesome. Great story, man. And I guess just for our audience's benefit, they can't see this, but I know you're currently wearing a Brisbane Lions hat. So tell us about how that hat came about and your affinity for Australia.
So I spent the last 2 years building a company based in Tweed Heads, Australia, called The Beach People. I was CEO of the company. We recently sold it. And I had the good pleasure of spending a lot of time on the Gold Coast, in Brisbane, and became a bit of a fan of footy. So I am definitely, I have a couple of hats, as a kind of a Gold Coast footy fan. But the Brisbane Lions hat is pretty cool. It goes with my complexion. But I used to watch all the games, and I kind of got hooked on footy while I was there, and certainly Australian football as well, rugby. Just became addicted to watching it with all my coworkers when I took my trips and was at my office in Australia.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that, man. And I mean, thanks for, I suppose, reaching out to appear on the show. And I mean, our audience may not be aware of this, but I had a couple of guests pull out this week, and I went to bed on Wednesday night shortly after leaving an update on my LinkedIn saying, hey, I need a guest for this week's show. And I woke up the next morning and there was something like 60 comments, 60 nominations. And maybe there's a lesson in this for entrepreneurs out there. I mean, you had an angle. I mean, you're doing a lot of venture investing, diversity, social inclusion, impact, different ethnic groups. You've obviously got credibility in the omnichannel marketing space, m-commerce, e-commerce, and there was reciprocity in that you said, hey, I'd love to have you on my podcast as well. And for me, that was enough to make you stand out from the rest of the pack. So maybe there's a lesson in there for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I mean, it was great when that popped up on my phone, and I think the lesson is perhaps you take the shot. Many people might have seen the out call and paid no attention to it, but one of my business partners, Jim Scharf, tagged me in it. And it was fantastic because when I saw what you're doing, I'm like, this is no brainer. I'd love to help, and I'd love to add some value. But I think the lesson for entrepreneurs is if you don't ask, you don't get. Mm-hmm. And it was definitely worth the effort, and I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, definitely. As am I. So perhaps you can give our listeners the 2,000-foot view of who Andrew Drew Koven is.
So Andrew Drew Koven, and the nickname Drew came about in college. I was always Andrew up until I went to Syracuse University, and my roommate began calling me Drew, which then led to about 50% of everybody that I came in contact with calling me Drew. So I just said, my birth name is Andrew Evan Koven, but nobody ever calls me Evan. So I kind of said people know me as both Andrew and Drew. My evolution really is I woke up one day after the last 10 years or so being a global executive and most recently a CEO, and found that what I really love doing is working with early stage entrepreneurs, in particular female entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of minorities, ethnicity. And I like to say, regardless of gender, race, or place, I'm trying to democratize access to capital and mentorship and create opportunities for people that are in the market solving problems that they have a unique perspective on. They've lived the problems. They understand the opportunities and how to develop them. And I've had the good pleasure of working with great people and great teams on a global level at Guess Jeans and Steve Madden Shoes and active in Internet Grocery. And I felt that I could lend a lot of value through LDR Ventures, which is my venture firm. And then I reached out to my network of peers and found that a lot of them wanted to offer their time and experience to do the same. And it's kind of taken off from there.
Yeah, and you've got quite a few notable investments already, some that our audience may be familiar with, such as Thrive Market, Pledgling, who are basically an impact donation platform for not-for-profits, Fame and Partners, which is an Australian company who offer bespoke designs in 2 to 5 days. And I actually saw Nairi Corby, the founder of Fame and Partners, speak at an event in Melbourne at KPMG about a year ago, and she was very, very impressive. Her story and the career trajectory was very impressive. So sounds like you're definitely empowering entrepreneurs from different backgrounds to go out there and create impact in the world. And I guess, you mentioned a few things there, that you look for people that have identified a problem, an area they know well. I mean, what else do you look for in investments, in entrepreneurs, before you spend that time and capital on them?
Well, it's going to sound cliche-ish, but I look at my team, we really look at the people behind the business. And we can tell a lot about how responsive the team is to the tough questions. So our process is we start with everybody being on an equal playing field. And then as we go through our discovery of due diligence and really getting to understand the business, and is this a business that has a meaningful scale, or is this more of a lifestyle opportunity? We like to get our head wrapped around what are we really looking at? Is there a bigger theme behind the stated theme? Is there a systemic change that's being fulfilled? Is there a bigger mission, higher purpose? But it really comes down to getting to know the entrepreneurs. And the way that we do that is in a very interactive, collaborative way. We don't do an assessment and say, hey, we've looked at your business plan, this is what we think. When we have a strong interest in a business, we spend a lot of time collaborating and talking back and forth and really getting to understand how the entrepreneurs handle the tough questions. Because really, in building a business, you're going to be faced with a lot of tough situations and you're going to have to be resourceful. So we look to gauge the level of resourcefulness and creativity and also honesty. We would much rather somebody say, I don't know, than make up an answer. I don't know, let me research that. And we always say, we're not putting you on the spot. If you don't know the answer, let us know, that's okay. So we try to make the entrepreneurs feel comfortable being vulnerable, if you will.
Yeah, and I'd say there's nothing cliche about that. Sometimes people say things are cliche because they hear it all the time, but there's a reason why they hear it all the time, and it's because it's true. And in this case, an entrepreneur, they may have a great idea, they may have a great background, but unless they're willing to hear no 99 times to get to that one yes, unless they're resilient, unless they're honest, and they've got good ethics that align with the strategy of your firm, then it's probably not going to be a good fit going forward, and they're probably not going to be very successful unless they're truly passionate about what they're doing and there's a greater purpose that they're working towards. Because building something from the ground up over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years is incredibly difficult, and unless you believe in what you're doing, you won't have the staying power to find that product market fit.
No, you're absolutely right. And stick-to-itiveness, risk-taking, balanced risk-taking, tenacity, being able to deal effectively and productively with rejection until you get that one acceptance is really, you're going to struggle a lot. I mean, I can tell you, even as an investor who spent many years as a C-level executive, I'm back in the entrepreneurial game myself. I'm in the business of helping entrepreneurs be successful. So I go through the same things that the entrepreneurs are going through: decision-making, where to put time and energy, resource allocation. So I'm living a parallel life to the entrepreneurs that I'm mentoring and my teams are mentoring and investing in.
Yeah, and on the entrepreneurs, aside from the, say, mental, emotional characteristics and attributes that you look for, in terms of the practical application of effort, what common pitfalls or mistakes have you seen startups make all too often?
Well, my partner Jim Sharp, who tagged me, and how we came together, he's fantastic at really digging into the numbers. And Jim and I have worked together for 5 years. We work together as partners at Guess. And the biggest mistake, or I say the most common mistake, is the entrepreneurs perhaps not truly understanding the market. And we see business plans where they say it's a $500 billion addressable market. But an example would be, yes, but if the business plan really is only going to be for shoes for people size 5 to 10 who only wear flats. Once you get to the truly addressable market versus the total market, we tend to find that there's an overstatement, if you will, which then leads to how well does the entrepreneur really understand their market? The second piece to that would be, has the entrepreneur ever worked in the market? So they're writing business plans. In some cases, they've never spent a day in fashion, never spent a day in food or health, which in some cases sometimes adds value. But if we saw a team that had a balance of a go-forward entrepreneur and a more seasoned or someone who had industry experience and really understood what it took, what it takes, as well as has had some bumps and bruises along the way, you give somebody $10 million and say, go figure out how to spend it. That's like giving the keys to a Ferrari to somebody who's first-time driver and saying, go figure out how to drive it. I think and I think that's on the investors to be really thoughtful. And what's the difference between somebody who puts money into a business and someone who's an active investor? So I think it's a two-way street. But to your question, we're really scrutinizing how well the entrepreneurs understand their market, and are they practitioners, and have they been operators in the market versus they wrote a business plan in B school and they automatically raise some money and think they know how to solve complicated things.
Yeah, and I absolutely love what you said there about the total addressable market and really having to narrow it down. And, we often hear entrepreneurs say something like, well, telecommunications is a $1 trillion market. And if we can just capture 1% of the market, then we'll make $10 billion or something like that. And it's just crazy because, one, you'd have to be pretty naive to think you can capture 1% of any market as if it was just so easy. And two, they're just clearly not identifying who their target customer is because telecommunications could mean absolutely anything. It's like what customer segment are you after? What age group? What drives them? Is it male? Is it female? What are their tastes? Why would they use you over another company? Are you 10x better than what their existing solution is? Like, there's so many questions that entrepreneurs don't really think about, and they just think, well, this IBIS World report said that this industry is worth so and so. So if we just capture a small amount of that, then we'll be fine.
Yeah, and that's a great point because again, it's if anybody could cut and paste something off an IBIS article or a research and say, I've cut and paste this into the top paragraph of my business plan. But that's if it was that easy, especially we live in a competitive world, and to that point exactly, there are a lot of people trying to solve the same, if not highly similar problems. A disregard for the competition in the space would be another thing that we see from time to time, where don't underestimate how much the competition is doing, and we can do it better. That's fairly subjective. So we really look for entrepreneurs that have been thoughtful and strategic and understand truly what business they're getting into and what it takes to be successful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. And Drew, you were recognized as a top 25 retailer by Apparel magazine. You've spent time working at some of the large apparel companies out there. You mentioned Guess, and you mentioned Steve Madden as well. And I'm keen to understand from the perspective of, I suppose, retail executives listening to this. What should large retail incumbents be thinking about, and how can they start to position themselves to take advantage of all of the technological and business model shifts in retail, in m-commerce, e-commerce, omnichannel marketing, everything that's going on? If I'm at the helm of a huge company, multi-million, if not multi-billion-dollar market cap, and we're getting, I suppose, attacked on all sides by smaller retailers, startups, and so on, what should we be thinking about, and how can we respond?
Well, a couple of high-level thoughts. The store closures that we're seeing today should have happened 10 years ago. So the reality is, if you did the unit economics on most retailers' businesses, it's likely, at the very least, we would find that 50% of most retailers' stores don't make money. And that number is higher when you get into specialty. So the contraction in store base is a dirty little secret that's been withheld for years. And the bloat in physical retail was perpetuated by retailers that accepted it was okay to lose money at half or 50 or 60 or 70% of your stores. But that doesn't come as a surprise to my peers, those of us, and there are many of us who've been in the operating realm of these businesses. So the first thing is, this is long overdue. The second thing is embracing the diversity of people within organizations. So this is the way we've always done it is a very dangerous mantra. And bridging experience, which has historically on the operational side helped to make sound decisions, with experience from a new generation, be it millennials, be it Gen Z, and bringing together those teams of people throughout the business on product development, on merchandising, on e-commerce, imagery. In the case of Guess, what is the definition of sexy? Who is defining sexy? And really widening the optics and building better collaboration and collaborative teams is critical. It really gets down to people. And I know that oftentimes egos get involved in these situations. I've been in those situations as a corporate executive where is the goal to thrive or the goal to survive? Do I want to keep my job or do I want to make sure everyone gets to keep their job? And in order to do that, for retail to truly be successful, you need to bring a lot of smart people that already exist within organizations together that have subject matter expertise to collaborate. The biggest challenge that has killed retail are the silos, and it continues to be pervasive. And that's why you're seeing some of these early stage companies, and some of them were later stage, some of them more mature, like Nike is a great example, and Apple is a great example, that are just opening up the doors to engaging and including so many people from so many walks of life in their experience, in their relationships, and they're getting it right because they're not relying on a small segment of people to know all the answers. They're collaborating.
Yeah, and that's an absolutely great point, Drew, on relying on a small segment of people. And I guess a lot of organizations, whether it's retail or other industries, are still operating on what is a very 20th century management science approach, where it's quite hierarchical and the decision makers are at the top of the food chain. And oftentimes they've been incentivized to make the right decisions, to plan voraciously, to mitigate risk to the nth degree. And while that may have worked when things were moving slower in the 20th century, today things move too quickly to have a 5 or 10 year plan to mitigate risk to the nth degree. And you need to bring in, like you said, people from the bottom of the proverbial food chain, people with different insights, and just get out there and try different things, because those short-term incentives, while shareholders want to see short-term wins, ultimately it could be the death of the company in the long term unless we look at different ways of doing things.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because you're really looking to build sustainable strategies, sustainable businesses, and there are many ways to juice your comps. If you have to be promotional on a recurring basis, that underlies an inventory miss or a product miss. So I think holistically, you're absolutely on point when it comes to, you have to get the right people in the room, keep them engaged, value their opinions, and give everybody an equal distribution of wins. And that's how a team wins. I think we're seeing a paradigm shift, but still it's relatively slow. And when you play that out to female executives and ethnicity executives and people being included in the conversation, it gets a little bit more complicated. So we're on the right path. We're at the right place at the right time, but we have to keep pushing this diversity, this inclusion, this build better teams as a mantra.
Yeah, and on female entrepreneurs, ethnic diversity, and so on, I imagine this forms a big part of LDR Ventures' investing philosophy.
It's at the core. Our mandate is to have 70% of our investments and mentorships behind women and people of different ethnic origins, be they people of color, Hispanics, in the case of Australia, indigenous people, where we really feel like we can add a lot of value with our network and our experience. And we feel like a lot of value can be added to us and help us to develop as better investors and have a more global perspective on problems that in certain cases, we, in our fairly isolated existences, we may be missing. And we want to open up our lenses to be receptive and on the front lines with thought leaders, and thought leaders come from all races, places, and genders.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, and as an investment philosophy and mandate. And have you got any, I suppose, notable case studies or stories to tell in the space of empowering, say, ethnic minorities to go out there and create impact and build businesses?
Yeah, I think that you mentioned before Nairi Corby and Feynman Partners. We learned about Nairi because I spent some time as an EIR entrepreneur in residence at QUT, and I know Anna Rook and I know Elaine Steed over at Blue Sky in your neck of the woods as well, who I admire both of them greatly. And we learned about Nairi and what she was trying to do, and immediately we were intrigued by the nature of the customization. We have some vertical expertise in customized fashion, but in meeting with her and really understanding in Australia, the ecosystem is not very fashion-centric for investment, and I would submit probably because it's more of a fintech marketplace, not very female-friendly. So when we engaged Nairi and met with her, she came, she spent time with us in LA. We loved the story. We loved her grit. We spent many hours together, and we were very active in speaking to her co-investors, and we put our weight behind her, and ultimately she ended up landing two very, very significant co-investors, and we were actively in contact with both. And I think that's a great example of we were at the right place at the right time with the right entrepreneur who we felt needed the extra endorsement, if you will. She was coming out of Australia, coming into another market to raise money, and we actively got involved and started cheerleading and reaching out to her co-leads to express our belief in her business. So I would cite that as a case of we recognize some market inefficiencies in Australia. We found an entrepreneur that manifested the things that we look for, and we were absolutely able to go and champion what we believe is going to be a very successful business. And we're looking at a company right now in the United States called Court Buddy, and they're looking to democratize access to legal services. It's a husband and wife team, American husband and wife team, and we think that they're solving a big problem for access to legal services. There are 129 million people in the United States that go unrepresented in court a year, and they're looking to make access to qualified legal services affordable and accessible. And one of the founders is a 10-year, very successful attorney, and his wife is a very successful ad and marketing executive. And we're very actively out fundraising for them right now. And we feel very strongly that the entrepreneurs have a unique perspective on the business model they're building. They've been in the court systems. They understand the challenges faced by lower to middle class consumers. And we see that as an unbelievable fit where they are in the market that they're looking to serve. So that would be another example of a company that fits within our investment thesis.
Yeah, and it's funny you should say democratizing access to legal services, because here at Collective Campus, we just wrapped up a legal tech startup accelerator, and the purpose of that was to help democratize access to legal services here in Australia, where 90% of people can't afford access to an attorney except for the most basic services. And I think that's a big opportunity for entrepreneurs everywhere. It's not just competing with what you can see, it's competing with what you can't see, with non-consumption.
Yeah, and we obviously have that in common as well. We're excited about the potential of legal tech, and we're really excited about the entrepreneurs, James and Christina Jones, who really have firsthand specialized knowledge of the problem and a really creative, business-minded approach to how they want to solve it. So it's the right entrepreneurs matched up with the right opportunity, which makes for very good results.
Awesome. And we'll be sure to add their company in the show notes of the podcast. And on retail, e-commerce, m-commerce, omnichannel, I mean, where do you see this space going in the next, say, 2 to 3 years, Drew? What should people be looking out for?
I see a continued importance on personalization and customization. We see Amazon making major investments in technology to identify market verticals to expand into. We're seeing it. I'm a pioneer. I was an early mover with some amazing people in internet grocery back in the 90s and early 2000s. So I see Amazon has been patient, and now they're stepping in a meaningful way. I think that being able to really take a good look at customers and what they're buying and how they're buying, the use of data and information has progressed to a place where it's interpretable, and that there are people within organizations and people that are going to school and coming out that have been bred on having a familiarity, if you will, with understanding how to look at this type of information. So I think again, I don't want to harp too much on data or big data because I don't want to overcomplicate it, but more common sense, looking at trends, looking at information, being proactive, talking to your customers. I think it's a lot of nuts and bolts stuff. Technology certainly helps as an enabler and a facilitator, but the common sense approach to engaging customers, offering good service, asking them where the bar was made and the bar was missed using technology, using communication protocols to gather data and to take action on data. I think having the data is one thing. Doing something with the data is really where it makes or breaks a business. I think that understanding social media and social influence versus people who have a lot of followers and forensic focus on a business and who you're for and what you stand for, and then building your followings with like-minded people versus trying to convince people to like you. I think that there's micro-influencers, and really being very studious about social media and key influencers, not saying we need to be there, but when we're there, how do we make sure that we're delivering a clear and consistent message, and authenticity, making sure we're not concocting a message to get in the conversation, but we're living, breathing, and acting on that message, because consumers are very savvy. The cost of switching is very low, and they can spot fakes from the real deal. It's a whole new generation of people that are digitally native, and they have short attention spans. So I think being sensitive and sensible about building businesses that are not necessarily for everyone, but the addressable market's large enough, and they're using the tools wisely, but don't dismiss the power of human interaction. Do not let the tools drive the decision making. They are aids to, but not a replacement for. And I would suggest to everyone in e-commerce and omnichannel retail, channel alignment, but don't forget the importance of people on both the customer side as well as people internally that are going to engage the customers and make sure that it's a really powerful relationship that's forged. Use technology to assist. E-commerce is a platform, it's a channel, and I think it's critically important to remember that. A store is a channel, e-commerce is a channel, but you still have to have great product that makes sense and meets with people's needs. And you have to have a reasonably long-term view, because getting a customer is very different than keeping a customer. So I think those rules don't change, but I think there are a lot more tools. If a company is really, really well thought out, there are a lot more tools to reinforce that message and continue that dialogue on an up-to-the-minute basis.
Yeah, and technology is definitely an enabler. It's the means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And unless we're delivering value, it's just pointless technology. And you've touched on a few things there in talking about data and personalization. And I know there's a few studies out there that talk about price and quality will outstrip, consumer experience will outstrip price and quality as the number one influencing factor behind decision-making purchases. Or purchasing decisions by 2020. And if you have the right data, if you're mining that data effectively and personalizing the customer experience effectively, then that CX just goes, it shoots up. And that's effectively how you can differentiate yourself from competitors in the space. But if you're all about, hey, we're cheaper, or our product's a little bit better and it's got better functionality, but your CX is all over the place, I don't think going forward, say in 5 years' time, people will be willing to accept that.
Yeah, I think the race to the bottom from a price perspective in fast fashion is not only devastating to the integrity of creativity, but the waste that's created environmentally. Fashion is the second most wasteful industry, second only to oil. And I think that the money we save is creating a high price to pay for future generations, because this stuff doesn't disintegrate. It ends up in landfills throughout the world, creates pollution, toxicity, and I think it's all going to catch up. And I think, again, to your point, the companies that are building better products that have some shelf life for the customer versus they're disposable, I think we're looking at a world where people are starting to wake up, whether it's through healthy habits. And healthy habits are not only food consumption and exercise, it's also the whole proliferation of electric vehicles and pollution and food waste, and also textile waste and other forms of waste. I believe that the dialogue is going to progress over the next couple of years, and we're going to begin waking up more and more to the impact of the decisions we're making And I think impact investing in companies that have impact products and are really thinking about the bigger picture of the globe are going to become more mainstream over the next decade or so.
Yeah, and a fantastic case study of that here in Australia is the Thank You brand. They started off with Thank You Water. Yeah, Thank You Water, and now Thank You Hand Wash and shampoo and all sorts of things. And the proceeds from sales of that product basically go towards things like clean water for rural villages in Sri Lanka, or rebuilding homes and stuff like that in the third world. And while they are probably twice the price of a competing product, people who I suppose are values driven have no problem paying that because they know it's going to create more impact rather than just going to the bottom line of some organization.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that. I actually had a chat today with an entrepreneur who has a company called Community Shoes, and they're giving, it's an early stage company in LA, and they're looking at Shinola, which is a company out of Detroit that really, they built their company Shinola to build Detroit back up, and Community Shoes is looking to give a portion of their proceeds back directly into LA, and that as they expand, they want to make sure that their business is being built to help bring jobs into the local communities, to create sustainable products. So I think we're also seeing, the Think Global, Act Local is becoming bigger and bigger. People in their 40s and 50s are taking inventory of the lives they've led. And I'm seeing that a lot more with my peers. And I think people that are younger, in their 20s and 30s, and even in their teens, are thinking a lot more about the world and not letting things go for granted. And perhaps some of the geopolitical relationships are sparking that. But there is definitely a heightened awareness, obviously access to a lot more information around, I want to know what's going on with who I'm buying from, and I want to make good decisions just beyond looking good or feeling good. I want to feel good, a very visceral, I'm doing something meaningful with my purchase. So the Thank You company is a great example.
Yeah, Thank You. And also Tom's comes to mind for, every pair of shoes that Tom's sell, they donate a pair of shoes to children in need. And I think they've so far given away something like 70 million pairs of shoes. So it's an incredible case study of an impact-driven company. And a few moments ago, Drew, you mentioned Amazon. And I know Australian retailers are, let's just say a little bit fearful of the impending entry of Amazon into the Australian market. And obviously Amazon Prime and the integration with tools like Alexa, where you can just say, "Hey Alexa, I'm out of milk," and it'll order some milk for you, and next thing you know, it's at your front door. What do you make of the, I suppose, freight train that is Amazon entering into markets all over the world?
Well, it's a freight train that's been 20 years coming, and I think that Jeff Bezos and his team have been very patient, very strategic, and are redefining retail by doing the basics exceptionally well. Price, speed of delivery, convenience with the same day delivery, and they continue to iterate on, the people like to report on patent searches, and there are blimps in the air that are going to be deploying drones and all this other cool stuff. I think they're removing every layer of friction in the transaction. They're saying, well, how do we make this experience better for customers? And they're doing it. They are beholden to a different standard. I think with Amazon, the company is not immensely profitable, nor has it ever been. And Jeff Bezos and his team will tell you that's not their mandate, and that's probably spot on. They're investing in data, and they're an infrastructure company that happens to sell product. But they got the model right by getting the supply chain, the logistics, and the distribution pieces right, and continue to drive that. So I think the reality is the question of the day is, what's your Amazon strategy for every retailer? And I think the response to that, especially in a market, I know Starbucks tried to crack Australia. They didn't quite succeed there. I think it becomes cultural. If people value price, or they value convenience more than supporting their local economies, where is that break point where price becomes too compelling? Or are there certain markets that are impervious? They're just like not in our backyard. And then there are businesses that are highly personalized and customized that Amazon is probably not looking at seriously today, but Amazon's more commodity driven. And I think ultimately there's probably, a case to be made that they will get into those personalized and customized businesses, but the power of a brand is critically important in that game then. So building good brands, building customer relationships, and not succumbing to being commoditized. Easier said than done, but it's a threat and it's a risk. If you can't beat them, how can you join them and collaborate? But they're not going away, and it's best to figure out what points of intersection there might be to work together or to create defensibility with service or uniqueness.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. And you mentioned Starbucks there, and I think one of the reasons why Starbucks didn't succeed, particularly in Melbourne, is because we're all coffee snobs here in Melbourne, Victoria.
Yeah.
And I mean, you touched on Amazon not making a profit until I think it was last year they recorded a profit. It was probably the first one in 15 years or so, and it's because they're so innovation driven. All the money they make, they plow back into growth, into exploring new things, and it kind of brings full circle what we were talking about earlier, that traditional retail executives are perhaps a little bit too focused on the short term, too focused on providing a dividend for their shareholders, that they don't take these big, bold bets. They aren't willing to deliver a loss because of the shareholder demands. But Amazon, I suppose, has managed to navigate that from day one and just be really intentional with how they communicate to their investors and say, hey, we're about innovation, we're about impact, and we're going to keep growing over time. We may not deliver a profit this year, next year, or the year after, but come 2025, we will be the number one company in the world in retail and in countless other industries too.
You just hit it on the head. They culturally and communicatively have been on message since day one. And, that's kudos to Jeff Bezos and his leadership team in building a culture that is very, I imagine it's a very intense culture inside of Amazon, but they're forensically focused on the customer experience. And, I'm sure a lot of people would like to plug into the mind of Jeff and his team, but I believe you have to give them unbelievable amounts of credit for, exactly to your point, sticking to their thesis, sticking to their why, their reason for being, and ultimately being able to raise a lot of money and have a war chest of money to be able to be the last person standing, if you will. However, that being said, Walmart and all the brands watched it happen. So Jeff Bezos, everybody watched as he did it. Now you see Walmart trying to catch up and Target, but everybody had a chance. However, internally, my personal experience is because there was a lack of alignment in a lot of companies, there was a lack of long-term, to your point, focus, and now we're paying the price. So Jeff did what he said he was going to do, and people woke up a little bit too late. So it's unfortunately a lot on the executives, and a lot of people fought very hard internally to try to get leadership to turn the cruise ship, if you will. So there are a lot of good people out there, a lot of warriors who did fight very hard for innovation, and probably a great podcast to have them tell their tales as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned PayPal. Well, not PayPal. You mentioned having a war chest there to invest in ongoing innovation, and it reminds me of Elon Musk, and he had his PayPal war chest to invest in Tesla and the Powerwall. But for him, it's not about making money; it's about his bigger dream of making mankind a multiplanetary species, and all the money he makes from Tesla, from Solar City, from the Boring Company, he's all plowing that back into SpaceX to chase these much bigger dreams and visions. And I guess it just gives you a sneak peek into the mind of some of these entrepreneurs like Bezos and Musk, because it is about so much more. And on having that war chest and communicating effectively with investors from day one, I interviewed Lawrence Levy, who was the CFO of Pixar back in 1994, and he got a personal invite from Steve Jobs to join the company. And this was before they released Toy Story. And when they were raising to support the production of Toy Story, they made it very clear to the investors that, hey, we're probably going to get halfway through production multiple times and throw it out and start again. It's going to cost millions of dollars, but that's the price of creativity. And if you want to be on the bus with us, then you just need to accept that. If not, then you need to go away and just find someone else to invest in.
Yeah, and again, you hit it right on the head. And you're looking for those Elon Musks and looking for those Jeff Bezoses and looking for Sarah Blakely's and looking for the Meg Whitmans, looking for the Sheryl Sandbergs, intrapreneurs and entrepreneurs, male and female, and really taking the time to understand their why or the chip on their shoulder. And Elon Musk is a great example. He plowed all his money back in and was sleeping on a couch and could barely afford food. So there's a much higher purpose that drives those people. And I think that's what makes, I won't even say an exceptional entrepreneur. That's an exceptional person. We can talk about Mother Teresa. We can talk about the Dalai Lama. We can talk about so many people who are giving their lives in pursuit of making lives better in their part of the world for others. So Jeff Bezos makes the world better for people to shop. Elon Musk is making the world, listen, this planet wasn't meant to support 7.5 billion people. We're overpopulated, hence why some of the other issues of food and pharma, but that's for a different day. But I think they see big opportunities to use their intellect. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, the list goes on and on with higher purpose. And I think we get there. Hopefully we don't get there too late as a society. And I'm hoping that we're starting to see some systemic changes with how people are thinking about their longer-term mission versus short-term rewards.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think we're starting to see that. And we run a kids entrepreneurship program called Lemonade Stand, and we ask the kids, what do they want to go out and create? What problem do they want to solve? 95% of the time, it's about doing something bigger for the world. It's about ending poverty or ending pollution. It's all sorts of stuff that pertains to something else other than themselves. Which is awesome to see. Whereas I think going back 20, 30 years ago, it would have been all about how can I make more money? But now I think you have a lot more kids in particular at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where it is about self-transcendence and how can we give back because their most basic human needs have already been met.
Yeah, we're definitely at an inflection point where people are thinking about their business decisions as well as their personal lives. Raising families and striking the balance. The world is a lot more stressful. It moves a lot quicker. We're always connected. And, I think we are seeing a lot of people that are embracing entrepreneurship, but in different ways. It could be someone who works from home. It can be a small shop. It doesn't necessarily need to be somebody who's looking to build the next multi-billion-dollar business, but someone who's looking to create 5 jobs in their local town in a business that has nice profitability. So I think the conversation about entrepreneurship is evolving, and I don't think like the Shark Tanks of the world or the Lions Dens are necessarily great representations because there are a lot of people that are out there who are entrepreneurs building good, sustainable, profitable businesses and with a higher purpose. So it's great to hear with your Lemonade program that kids are starting to articulate that because it really all starts with the kids and the parents and what messages that they're digesting. And then, they're going to be the future adults and leaders of the world. So that's very encouraging to hear that there is an element of giving and philanthropy that's baked in at a very early age.
Yeah, definitely. Drew, you've been an awesome guest, but I cannot let you go without throwing you into our 3-question lightning round. Are you ready to rock and roll?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So question number one is, if you could work for any organization at any stage of the company life cycle, so you could go back to the 18th century if you had to, who would it be and why?
You know, that's an unbelievable question. I think that I would go back and work for Milton Hershey. Mm-hmm. I am a chocolate, and it would be, if I was born and bred in Australia or Europe, it might be Cadbury. But I am a chocolate fanatic, and I love Milton Hershey's story, and I'm really intrigued by, that particular point in time where, building the manufacturing and scaling up a company and what he did socially, Hershey, Pennsylvania, and built out this whole geography of people. And, he had his fair share of failures. But I think it would be really exciting to go back to that period of time and really, kind of the industrial time and be part of building something that, of course, also puts a lot of smiles on people's faces, but product development and creating machinery that really was game-changing, and then creating a society, if you will, and a whole town, which is now legendary. I think that would have been a lot of fun, and that would be my answer to that question.
That's a great answer, and it's definitely the first time we've had Hershey's as the company of choice, but definitely makes sense from my perspective. I'm more of a Cadbury man, like you alluded to, being from Australia.
I love Cadbury. By the way, believe me, that's the real poison for me. They're so good. But I'm a chocolate fanatic.
Love it. And question number two is, if you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask?
I would ask my grandfather on my father's side, who escaped the Holocaust. He got out, and unfortunately his family perished. He was fortunate, but he lost all his brothers and sisters. And I would ask him how he rationalized and made sense of all that and moved on with such great loss. And he came to America from Poland with very little and was very happy. So I would ask him, really, what is it all about, Grandpa?
Yeah, that's probably one of the best answers that I've had to that question thus far, because I think in this 21st century age of ours, we often complain when we can't get access to Wi-Fi or our train is 5 minutes late, yet there's so much to be grateful for. And I think by connecting with someone who's gone through something so profound and so impactful like that, and to actually get through that and to move on with life, it just, I suppose, reinvigorates your appreciation for life, and that life is short, and that we've got no entitlement necessarily to be here, and we're just lucky that we are, and we should make the most of it and stop, complaining about little insignificant things that tend to ruin our mindset and ruin our days and how we show up in the world.
Absolutely.
Love it. And final question was on rituals and routines. Do you have any that help you stay on top of your game, Drew?
Yeah, I do have a few. I like to read a lot. I study the Torah. I study the Old Testament every day. And I've been doing that now for the past year and a half or so. And I find that it's very grounding, exactly to what we were just talking about before. I'm a big believer that history always repeats itself. I don't think what's going on in today's day and age wasn't happening thousands of years ago. It's very helpful. And, I have been to church as well, so I study other religions and look to find deeper meaning. And I really work at not getting caught up in the commercialism or materialism. And I think there's a lot to be said for the scriptures and the Torah and the scholars. So my go-to ritual is I try to get as much time in early in the morning or late at night. when it's quiet. And my other ritual is I spend an ungodly amount of time with my wife, who's also my business partner, and keeps me grounded. And my kids, I have a 16-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I work very happily and very hard at being available and scheduling my life so that I'm a big part of theirs. And that's become really important to me as I've gotten older. Time goes very fast.
Yeah.
So those are, and I jog. So that's probably my other ritual is I know when it's time to go for a run, clear my head, and sometimes my wife pushes me out the door, which is very helpful. But I try to find that balance to keep my head clear so I don't get too clogged up on any one particular thing at any one time.
That's beautiful. And I guess our audience can find out more about LDR Ventures over at ldrventures.com. They can find you on Twitter at Drew Koven, and that's Koven with a K. Is there anywhere else they should be going to check out or to find out more about yourself and your companies?
Yeah, if they want, our podcast, The Biz Fix, all one word, The Biz with a Z Fix. And I'm looking forward to having you on the podcast and asking you these questions and some others. These have been great questions. Yeah, check out thebizfix.com or in the Apple Store under podcast, The Biz Fix. Give it a listen. We're always looking for feedback and comments, and I love what you're doing, and I think this is so valuable to impart this information, and I hope that what we've shared here today, what I've shared is helpful to those listening, and I've added some value to their lives.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it has been. And on that point, do you have any parting words of wisdom for our audience, Drew?
The best way to get started is to get started. Nothing is done until it's done. And I have not encountered anything other than me being able to run a sub 5-minute mile, where, I've got a bad right knee, 2 knee surgeries, so that doesn't help. But I would really, really encourage everybody, be who you are, pursue your path, don't get consumed with what others think your life should be. We are all on our own journey. We're on the journey together, but respect one another, cooperate, collaborate, and practice oneness. Because if we're all in this together, we go a lot farther together. We may go faster by ourselves, but in the long run, we go a lot further together. And that's what I would like to share with everybody from my life experience. And I've learned the lessons along the way. I didn't have all those thoughts, but as I've gotten older, that's what life has taught me.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Drew. You've been an awesome guest.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me.
Hey guys, it's Steve again. If you're picking up what we're putting down, we'd love it if you took just a minute of your time to like, share, or subscribe to Future Squared on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. It would mean a hell of a lot to the team here who work effortlessly to bring you thought leaders and experts on topics of corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement on a weekly basis. As always, you can find more resources on innovation, including blogs, books, podcasts, videos, webinars, and tools at www.collectivecamp.us. If you'd like to connect with me on Twitter, you can do so at Steve Glaveski. That's Glaveski. Until next time, keep innovating. Future Squared out.